affirm the resolution. Resolved. Birthright citizenship should be abolished in the United States. According to the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act, birthright citizenship refers to a person's acquisition of citizenship by virtue of the circumstances of his or her birth. The word abolished, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, means to end the observance of a practice. Because citizenship is part of the social contract between a government and its people, it should only be granted to those not of the nation's descent if it is in the best interest of the nation's people. This debate is a question of who should be granted citizenship, and if the sole fact of being born on American soil should automatically guarantee this special status. We present two contentions in affirmation of the resolution. Our first contention is that birthright citizenship overextends legal residence in the United States. Subpoint A. Birthright citizenship provides citizenship to individuals who have no real ties to the United States. As William Stevens of the Texas Wesleyan Law Review notes, under the social contract, citizenship is based upon mutual consent. The citizen must agree to be subject to the jurisdiction of the state, and the state must agree to provide the protection of the rule of law. Citizenship should only be granted to those who have a history in the nation, either by ancestry or by extended residence. According to Lionel Braglia of the University of Texas Review of Law and Policy, 1 out of 10 births in the United States is to an illegal immigrant mother. These individuals who are granted citizenship receive it without any demonstrated or implicit allegiance to the United States. Subpoint B. Birthright citizenship gives illegal immigrants an incentive to come to the United States and undermines the rule of law. In addition to the obvious reasons of wanting to give one's children the opportunities of U.S. citizenship, birthright citizenship carries with it other legal complications. As Linda Spock of the National Constitution Center notes, having a child on U.S. soil offers the parents an essential legal tie to the United States that can complicate deportation and may factor into proposed amnesty programs. Birthright citizenship makes it much easier for illegal immigrant parents to remain in the United States. Immediately after the child is born, the family gains a pseudo-legal status. The Center for Immigration Studies estimates that a family that illegally immigrated and had a child in the United States is 6 times less likely to be deported than a family without a child. Birthright citizenship rewards illegal behavior and undermines the rule of law. Our second contention is that birthright citizenship causes economic harm in the United States. Subpoint A. Birthright citizenship drains government resources. The government spends money on more individuals who are legal immigrants as a result of birthright citizenship. In the United States, non-citizens are not meant to be entitled to government benefits. However, with birthright citizenship, illegal immigrants who have children in the United States are able to obtain these benefits, even though they are not American citizens or legal residents, on behalf of their children. The Federation for American Immigration Reform estimates that the government pays $113 billion annually to illegal immigrants, which diverts government spending. The Heritage Foundation estimates that a family that immigrated illegally pays an average tax of $10,573, but receives benefits of $30,160, amounting to an average government cost of $20,000 annually per illegal immigrant family, not including the shared costs awarded to all Americans, for which illegal immigrants fail to bear. Subpoint B. Illegal and legal immigrants who benefit from birthright citizenship cause economic harm to citizens of the United States. Illegal immigrants often have comparatively little education or experience, and when they stay in the United States, they suppress wages because they are willing to take lower pay, well below minimum wage, because they are hired outside of official records. For the lowest income levels, NPR estimated in the 2006 report that illegal immigrants lower wages by up to 8%. Also, according to a December 2009 report from the Migration Policy Institute, illegal immigrants make up 25% of agricultural workers and 17% of construction workers. Unemployment among legal residents in these fields, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is approximately 30%, indicating that American workers are actively searching for jobs that are not available to them because of the many incentives given by birthright citizenship. Because birthright citizenship gives incentive for more immigration, both illegal and legal, the government is failing to promote the general welfare of its citizens. Birthright citizenship overextends citizenship and causes economic harm. For these reasons, I urge your affirmation.
Birthright citizenship should be abolished in the United States. Before we begin, we would like to note that this round should be viewed in a vacuum. Thus, we should only look towards the direct benefits and harms of abolishing birthright citizenship, and not towards possible solutions afterwards used to fix the problems stemming from the policy change. Second, the Pew Hispanic Center, the Urban Institute, the Tulane Law Review, and the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas all agree that immigration is solely motivated by employment opportunities. These sources also find that welfare is by no means linked to immigration incentives, and that birth tourism as an incentive makes up an incredibly small portion of those crossing our borders illegally. Contention 1, abolishing birthright citizenship would be catastrophically unethical. Abolishing birthright citizenship would leave many true American citizens citizenshipless, creating a permanent underclass in America. As Michael Fix of the Migration Policy Institute writes, under a constitutional repeal of the birthright citizenship language of the 14th Amendment or the proposed Birthright Citizenship Act of 2009, U.S.-born descendants of unauthorized immigrants would be denied legal status in the U.S., even though in all likelihood they would be thoroughly American in every other aspect. U.S.-born children of illegal immigrants may be raised speaking English, would be fundamentally the same as their legal peers, except for two major reasons. They would have limited opportunity in career advancement due to their non-citizenship status, and would be subject for deportation despite never actually crossing a border. Furthermore, their descendants, the third generation and higher, might not even have any claim to the citizenship in their countries of their immigrant ancestors because they and their parents were not born in these countries. Jennifer Huck of Penn State University finds that by 2050 there will be a subordinate class of over 24 million inhabitants. According to the Harvard Law Review, under this policy change we would contradict a fundamental value deeply embedded in our Constitution. This is because the equality principle does not permit government to single out undocumented children as a way of expressing opposition to illegal activity for which they are not responsible. Any government effort to control the conduct of adults by acting against their children constitutes a ludicrously ineffectual attempt to reduce illegal immigration. Because children are both helpless and blameless in their status, it is unfair to blame them for their parents' crimes. Donald Hernandez of the Foundation for Child Development explains, a repeal of the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship clause would result in deliberate harm to children, restricting a U.S.-born child's access to health care, food assistance programs, legal employment, and other basic services. Essentially, by limiting birthright citizenship, we will create a permanent underclass of true helpless Americans in our society, which is inherently an outrageous moral violation. Contention 2, danger in hospitals. As per the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act, or EMTALA, emergency departments and hospitals must provide medical care to anyone regardless of citizenship, whether or not they can pay. And because no legal worker is granted healthcare coverage or sufficient salaries, these are their only options. As a result, the Federation for American Immigration Reform determined that illegal immigrants utilize emergency rooms more than twice the amount as the general population, which leads to two major harms. First, hospital closing. Madeline Cosman of the Journal for American Physicists assesses that the provision of free medical care to illegal immigrants has bankrupted America's finest hospitals, especially in states such as California. Second, overcrowding. Edwin Rubenstein of the ERS Research Institute explains that illegal immigrants are the primary reason why half of American hospitals are overcrowded, and that a significant portion of emergency room patient deaths were preventable if not for this overcrowding. Clearly, 24 million additional illegal immigrants abolishing birthright citizenship would lead to an absolute devastating impact to American health. Thus, for the aforementioned reasons, we urge negate.
Can I have protest, please? Okay, so starting with your second contention where you say that dangers to hospitals.
Yeah.
Okay, you say that illegal immigrants cost more to hospitals, correct?
Yes.
So is that a function of just them being designated as illegal immigrants, or is that a function of where these people are coming from to begin with?
I mean, we're telling you that they use the hospitals more, and essentially under your policy change, what's going to end up happening is we're going to keep illegal immigrants in our nation, but without providing them welfare, which means what's going to end up happening is they're going to need to use emergency care more often.
Okay, so is that a function, though, of them being illegal immigrants? What we're saying, actually, is that it doesn't matter regardless of what we distinguish them as.
I mean,
what it matters is their socioeconomic status. The reason
yes.
why they need to go to hospitals more often would be because they
regardless
from lower
what we're telling you is that under your world, you're seeing more of this impact of having illegal immigrants use our hospital system, of danger our hospital system. It's already bad under the
But you're basing it under the assumption, though, that you're basing it under the assumption that illegal immigrants, if I designate someone an illegal immigrant, that makes them more likely to use hospital services.
So under
what we're saying is that's
under your world, when we get rid of these welfare costs, these welfare benefits that we're giving, right? They're not going to have preventative care, correct? Right?
Well, no, it's
they're
not
going to have
person.
Medicare and Medicaid, right?
Somebody who's in the United States would still be entitled to basic health care in the event of emergency.
Yes. Your law is that we're
Constitutionally,
one of
the
your
Supreme
points
Court
is that
found
we're
that you
getting rid
can't
of
deny it.
one of your points is welfare, right? So currently,
Right.
if we have an illegal immigrant in America, they wouldn't be receiving welfare under your world,
I
right?
think you're misinterpreting though. What we're
Is
saying
that-
is that
I'm
illegal
not
immigrants
asking you a
are
question,
getting
though.
welfare though
I'm just
because
asking you
of
a question.
birthright citizenship.
I'm just asking you a question. Under your world, do illegal immigrants receive welfare benefits?
Welfare
No.
benefits, no, which is
All right.
exactly what
So
we're saying
if they're
is
not
the harm
receiving
of
preventative
birthright
care,
citizenship.
if they're not receiving preventative care, they go to the emergency room more often and thus exacerbate all of the harms I tell you in my second.
But again, you're not
But
showing
now can I
any
ask
link
you a
just by
question?
just
Now can I ask you a
nominative status.
question?
There's no difference between them.
But now
Just
can I ask
because
you a
the-
question?
But-
Alright, so should we ever outweigh economic issues if they're not catastrophic to our nation? Should we ever outweigh economic issues over moral issues?
What we're seeing is that they're actually intertwined. You're trying to separate the two of them, but because someone comes to the United States, you agree for economic opportunity, right? That's
Yes.
your contention.
Yes.
What we're saying is that birthright citizenship actually allows this economic opportunity. Would you agree that the United States is generally a better alternative from where they're coming from?
I mean, it depends on where they're coming from, but sure.
Okay, so then don't they want to stay in the United States?
I mean, for the most part, yeah.
Okay, so that means birthright citizenship provides a means of them staying in the United States.
I mean, not
by granting
necessarily.
a pseudo-legal status, which we talked about.
All I'm telling you is that we should be weighing the moral, ethical issues over the simple issue that we sort of somehow costing a little bit of money in welfare, which in fact most illegal immigrants do pay back. On average, illegal immigrants provide $1.58 billion in state revenue, but only take out 1.16. So we're seeing on the whole we're making money.
We're looking at
Well, I don't
total tax
think we should
revenue
be
where
weighing
we
this
actually
around.
cite in our case where illegal immigrant families cost on average $20,000. And
Alright,
that's net to the
so Adam will
government,
bring up
considering everything that they
a
do.
conflicting source. What I'm telling you is that even if we do in the economic part, we're not telling the judge to
But
vote
we're
on
saying
it.
that you
We're
can't
saying the judge
separate
should
the moral
always-
implications from the economic implications.
We're saying-
They are intertwined
Stop.
inherently.
The case for the resolution is clearly against the resolution. Is clearly flawed. Begin by refuting my opponent's case contentions, and if time remains, move back to reinforce my own points. Beginning with their first contention, they mention essentially the idea that such an abolition would be unethical, and then within that, there are really two sort of fundamental ideas: the idea of an underclass and the idea that these people should be entitled to the same equal rights, status, etc. So let's begin with the concept of the underclass. So the idea behind this argument is fundamentally flawed. The group of people supposedly forming an underclass is a group that resides initially illegitimately in the United States. So Leo Rao of the Arizona Republic further explains that the underclass issue is, quote, certainly not a function of the birthright citizenship issue. It's a function of us not doing anything with illegal immigration, end quote. We're seeing two fundamental distinctions about who the moral group is, who we're supposed to be acting in favor of these policies. Then there are two major ethical responses we can look to from my opponent's points. So the first idea is the appropriate analogy for this sort of idea of giving citizenship, giving these rights to people based on their birth in the United States. It's sort of like saying that, well, if I rob a bank and give money to my child, well, they should be entitled to keep that money because it wasn't them who robbed the bank in the first place. What we're seeing is that because there's a result of a crime here, it's not unethical to not give the people the rights that they would otherwise have. My opponents are falsely assuming this assumption that these people are automatically American by virtue of being born on American soil. There's something that they need to prove there when they're arguing this, and in order to say that that's the part of the ethical base, that's who we're acting for. But our contention is when we're talking about the social contract and citizenship policies, they have to act in favor of those citizens who are already here, and that's what we need to be considering in the moral group. And then the other part of their first contention is essentially that all people born on U.S. soil should be entitled to the rights of citizens, equality, because it's unethical to treat them differently based on so on and so forth, all these circumstances. So then we talked about the social contract issue already, about how these aren't the moral group that we're trying to do here. It's not the responsibility of the government to protect their welfare so much as it is the citizens, and that's what we need to look toward. But we also see, furthermore, Roger Smith, professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania, directly contradicts this idea of equality, explaining, quote, if mutual consent is the irreducible condition of membership in the American polity, it is difficult to defend a practice that extends birthright citizenship to native-born children of illegal aliens. The parents of such children are, by definition, individuals whose presence within the jurisdiction of the United States is prohibited by law. They are manifestly individuals, therefore, to whom the society has explicitly and self-consciously decided to deny membership. And if the society has refused to consent to their membership, it can hardly be said to have consented to that of their children who happen to be born here while their parents are in violation of American law. End quote. And this goes back to this fundamental idea of, I rob a bank, give the money to my children, therefore they should be entitled to have it because it wasn't them who committed the crime. So you need to look both at the ethical group who we're trying to act here, the American polity, the American citizens, and the actual nature of whether we're giving something to them that, or taking something away from them that they do deserve, or not giving them something that they don't deserve to begin with. Moving on to their second contention, they talk about this idea of hospitals and the increase in illegal immigrants and this whole bankruptcy issue and the burden that's put on them. So first, their major idea, that because we're taking away welfare from these people, is that they'll have less preventive care. What they need to show now is that that preventive care happens. We need to see that that preventive care is there, and I would contend that it isn't because of the poor socioeconomic conditions of these people to begin with. And if they can prove that preventive care, and that this preventive care would drop because of this sort of change, that's the first step toward proving their point. But then they also need to show this idea that they also ignore this idea of a change in status versus a change in the actual migration patterns. So what they're arguing is that the change in status of who we call an illegal immigrant and who we don't is more important than the actual idea of who comes here in the first place. What we're arguing is that while we understand there are obviously other reasons for illegal immigration, there are two fundamental reasons why birthright citizenship contributes to the problem. First, the idea that the citizenship for their children is very valuable property, and it's something that parents want to gain for their children, and therefore there's an incentive to do that. And then the second is also part of our first contention, this idea that by anchoring themselves with their children, they're able to maintain those economic motivations, therefore working in both fundamental reasons, and for all these reasons, I urge you to affirm. Thank you.
So let's move down my opponent's case. Before I go back and defend my own, start off with their first contention. They talk about how we're overextending birthright citizenship, and this is leading to like 1 out of 10 illegal immigrants being demonstrated without citizenship, and how like social ties aren't necessarily correlated to where you're born. But remember, first of all, my first response is that this logic cuts both ways. For example, if you look to a just sanguinis system, why is it fair that someone living entirely in France now is able to pass, say, a U.S. citizenship onto their child who has nothing to do with the country upon which they just received that citizenship? But my second response is if you look to Harvard University, they compare just soli nations with just sanguinis nations, and they find that in just soli nations, these illegal immigrants and their children are 20% more likely to speak the language of which the nation that they're in than their original home language, meaning that assimilation is much more likely to happen when you have a son or a daughter who is interconnected with the society upon which you are living in, and that is a big issue in today's round. But let's look through the second subpoint. They talk about how this birthright citizenship is a huge incentive, and this is the reason why we're having all these immigration problems with 400,000 children every single year. But first of all, cross-apply our second observation. We gave you the Tulane Law Journal, we gave you the Pew Hispanic Center, we gave you the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, okay? All of these studies basically say the primary reason why we have immigration is because of the job market. Immigrants do not come across the border to have a child. Immigrants do not come across the border for welfare. Immigrants come across the border because they are statistically able to make 10 times more money doing a low-level job than they are in their original home nation. That is the reason why, and that being said, that level of immigration is going to remain constant in the pro and the con worlds. But my second response is that they don't actually quantify the numbers whatsoever in that subpoint. We're given nothing to weigh this to. Let's look at their second contention. They talk about economic harms, they talk about the draining of resources, and how immigrants take away like $10,000 every single year. Okay, maybe that's true, but they don't give you how much the immigrants put back into the system. For instance, if you look into the Immigration Policy Center, they note that undocumented migrants produce $1.58 billion in state revenue, which exceeded the $1.1 billion in state revenue that they received. The University of Chicago agrees, saying a 2011 study by the National Center for Policy Analysis finds that undocumented workers paid approximately 46 as much in taxes as American-born citizens, but received only 38% as much from the government. So clearly they're putting more into the system than they're in fact taking out. But my second response is that you're always in today's round going to be prioritizing morality over economy or any sort of economic impact, as long as those economic impacts, A, don't destroy our country or harm the country, or B, harm other forms of morality. That being said, I'm going to go back and defend my own case. Look to our first contention. They respond to our issue about the underclass, basically saying, it's not even a big issue. It doesn't matter that these children are being born and raised in America, being born and raised speaking English. It's simply the government has to enforce the law on a principle of morality, okay? And sure, if you want to talk about this principle of morality, like my opponent used this metaphor, like the father steals from the bank, and the son gets to keep the money. I think a better metaphor is if my father steals from the bank, I shouldn't go to jail with my father. That's a better metaphor because that's actually what's happening. The child never crossed the border. The child never stole money from the welfare system. The child was just born and happened to be born in the United States. There is something unethical about someone being raised up until the age of, say, 12 years old, only speaking English, espousing American values, going to American public education, being literally the same as their peers, except for a piece of paper upon which, because they're a piece of paper which classifies them as a citizen or not a citizen. And that's clearly unethical. And finally, they responded to our hospital point by saying, like, look, it's a problem with the hospital system. It's not a problem with, like, birthright citizenship. But it clearly is, because if you have that huge influx, remember, immigration levels are going to be constant. If you have that huge influx of people coming in the pro and con world, we'd rather have welfare so people have preventative care than simply people going to the hospitals, hurting the hospitals twice as much, leading to all these harmful deaths, etc., harming the taxpayers even more. Vote on. Ready for crossword.
Next break.
Stop.
So you made the comment in your last speech about how these people are punished even though they happen to be born here, right?
They are born here.
Okay, so you're saying that, what about happening to be born here entitles them to get the rights of citizenship to begin with?
I mean, what you being born here, what entitled you to get the rights
What
of citizenship?
we're saying is that it's two
Like, why
complementary
is-
citizens, jus sanguinis and jus soli, right?
Yeah,
We're
sure.
saying that it's essentially implicit and almost necessary to try to assume this
What you're-
acceptance of the
I
social
understand what you're
contract by
saying.
virtue of being
You're
born to
basic-
an American parent.
Let me
But you can't do that by geography.
Can I respond? Okay, what I was saying, I understand what you're saying. You're saying that social ties aren't important, okay? Social ties are very, no, you're saying social ties are extremely important, and that this
I don't know what you mean by
Americanization,
social ties.
like they're not American, they aren't Americanized upon
Well,
birth,
no,
right?
I'm saying that we can't know for a system that automatically grants citizenship to anyone born based on geography.
Sure.
That's one that doesn't discriminate
Sure.
based on allegiance and shouldn't exist.
Sure, that's, okay, I disagree that it shouldn't exist, that's the entire reason why
Well,
we're debating.
I understand.
But I would say that citizen, you can't look at that citizen, like, I proved to you in my most recent rebuttal speech, I gave you that study from Harvard University, pointing out how assimilation occurs, those social ties are created 20%
okay.
more, let me finish, please, let me finish. 20% more of the time when you have a just solely nation when compared to a just single
Okay, so
nation.
birthright citizenship gives citizenship at birth, right?
Sure.
So does assimilation happen at birth?
Not necessarily. Like,
That's the idea.
Here's the thing.
We're
Here's the thing.
assuming that this
But
development is
here's the
going to
thing.
occur
But
by
here-
virtue of giving this based on geography. You can't have an automatic system that does
But
that.
here's
In
the
any
thing.
way, shape, or form, it has to be abolished.
Oh, first of all, I again would disagree because you're not giving any logic behind it. That logic you're using cuts both ways. For example, as I said in my most recent rebuttal speech, if your father was an American citizen, he lives in France, you were born in France, why are you an American
Because
citizen?
the idea is, again, we're giving this.
How do you have any social tie whatsoever?
Okay, this is a response I gave before as well. We're saying that we have to assume some sort of hereditary system that exists. We need to keep that
Why?
hereditary for convenience
Why?
purposes. And
For
secondly,
convenience purposes?
it exists both in a
Here's-
pro
here's-
and con
here's the
world, that
problem.
hereditary
Your
transfer
logic,
is
your
non-resolution.
logic literally is non-unique to what you're saying. It's like
It is.
I
What we're
literally
saying
gave
is
you
that
an example.
we assume the transfer by heredity in order to give the social contract
again,
burden. That's the
again,
idea.
I'm disagreeing
That's
with
the
that.
idea
You
of
haven't
using
provided-
ancestry as a means of.
You haven't provided a logical link as to why that's fair. Like you just said,
I'm saying it's
you just said the social ties don't occur when you're born at birth. I'm saying the social ties
Well, once
also
again-
don't occur with just sanguineous. I would rather look to a system upon which you don't starve and kill 24 million people living in the United States.
Once again, first of all, this is present both in a pro and con world because we're not abolishing jus sanguinis and it exists in the current world as well.
Just sanguineous
And what we're
works
saying
for
is that
international.
so it's
Wait,
first of all, it's not resolution, so I don't know why we're
wait a
spending
minute.
this time on this.
Just sanguineous in the United States. First of all, it exists basically for international businessmen and international ambassadors.
Well, then it's to fill in the gaps.
Completely non-applicable to the
It's
average
totally
Mexican
applicable.
immigrant.
Of course, it's not applicable to the Mexican immigrant because it's
There's
for
600
Americans.
people
That's the
out
idea.
600 people out of 300 million people who use
That's-
just sanguineous
that's the
policies
entire
in the United
idea.
States.
If we-
That's not birthright citizenship.
I agree.
He's so good at the crossword. Dude, the emotion is on. You can't compare anything to it.
Want me to start? Judges, right? So first, just a quick clarification that just came up in Crossfire about the difference between jus soli and jus sanguinis. We are not contending that jus sanguinis is birthright citizenship. We think that they are two distinct systems as was outlined in our case. And what we are instead saying is that currently jus sanguinis is used in the United States to fill in gaps, and that it would be kind of counter to jus soli once you abolish birthright citizenship. That's what we are contending. Okay, so now moving on. My opponent's framework states that we must consider all arguments in a vacuum. However, we must realize that birthright citizenship and illegal immigration don't occur in a vacuum. There are incentives, including welfare, citizenship, and economic opportunity, which are all incentives that my opponents have agreed to. Abolishing birthright citizenship impacts all of these factors. Obviously, all these results aren't occurring in a vacuum, so therefore that would really be a very narrow interpretation and would ignore a lot of the impacts of the resolution. Okay, so now moving on to my opponent's first contention. They state that abolishing birthright citizenship is unethical because it creates an underclass. First, we must look at the rule of law as a barometer for determining ethics. Birthright citizenship rewards illegal immigrants by providing their children with citizenship and granting them a pseudo-legal status. This is inherently unethical. They also attempt to distinguish between economic and moral issues, but we've seen that the two are connected. They tie this back again to their framework, where they say that economics is the main incentive. But we need to see, even if economics is the main incentive, we've shown how birthright citizenship is an avenue to achieve economic incentive. We've shown through birthright citizenship that illegal immigrants through their children can obtain welfare. Again, that's an economic incentive, but it occurs because of birthright citizenship. Also, in the United States, there are more job opportunities for illegal immigrants, and they are able to stay with a pseudo-legal status, again, because of birthright citizenship. So again, the issues of economics and birthright citizenship are inherently intertwined. Okay, so now their second contention is that abolishing birthright citizenship endangers hospitals. We've shown that this isn't a function of status, but rather a function of socioeconomic status. It's not a function of citizenship, however, which is something that my opponents have consented to. We've also demonstrated that eliminating birthright citizenship takes away the incentive to come illegally, and it would reduce illegal immigrants. So even if we consider their premise, it would exacerbate the problem. For all these reasons, I urge a pro-ballot.
As having morality take precedent over economics, unless my opponents definitively prove to you that these economic harms are going to somehow drastically hurt the economy, it's not something to vote off for if they're not proving to drastic impact. But if you do want to vote off impacts, go back to when Adam read his rebuttal speech, saying that the average illegal immigrant puts in, or state-wise, puts in $1.58 billion a year, but takes out $1.16 billion a year. So on average, we're helping the economy with our side. But we shouldn't be looking towards the economy, which is why the first major issue in today's debate is that immorality. Now, we see no reason why you should punish a child for his parents' actions. Again, the appropriate analogy is, why should you punish a child for his father or mother's crimes? This is simply not fair to do. What we're telling you is that by eventually doing this, and by punishing them for the crimes, you're seeing an underclass in the third and fourth generation. Because although the second generation child may be able to go back to his original country, the third and fourth generation child will literally have no place to go, no citizenship, and will be essentially citizenshipless in the world. And this is a major moral violation that you should never vote for in today's debate. What this means is that it's an extreme moral violation that outweighs all the economic harms. And furthermore, in regards to assimilation, we're telling you that our system provides for better assimilation. Go back to the Harvard card that tells you that you're seeing a 20% more assimilation with a birthright citizenship status. Because why is it that when I had two American parents who live in France all their life, who live in a different nation all their life, when they have a children, that children is somehow definitively American? This is simply not fair. You're seeing assimilation in our world. And the second major issue in today's debate is that of the hospitals. Now, my opponents are saying it's not an issue of birthright citizenship. But we're telling you, when you eventually do get rid of birthright citizenship, you're classifying more illegal immigrants. You're classifying more people as illegal immigrants. And by doing so, you're ridding them of all their preventative care. You're ridding them of all the welfare costs, which they say is a good thing. And by doing so, you increase the emergency room costs, you increase overcrowding, and you damage America's hospital system. This is a major voting issue. Thus, I urge you to vote con.
So you just mentioned in your speech about that it would cause harm, like someone several generations later, then they wouldn't be able to obtain citizenship.
Like the third generation on.
Okay, but you're agreeing though that abolishing birthright citizenship doesn't mean that there's no distinction or that there's no exception, that it only would be based on hereditary.
No, because what eventually would happen is that, like, the second generation kid would be able to return to Mexico, return to Estonia, return to his original nation. But the third and fourth generation, the problem is that many nations in the world don't give citizenship to everyone. They say you have your parent has to be citizenship or you have to be born.
Okay,
what this means is that the third, fourth, fifth, and on, those people will not have citizenship in any
but
nation
in
in the
a
world.
world, we don't need to adopt any of those policies.
Sure.
You don't have
to advocate a specific plan.
Right,
You have
which
to
is
prove-
exactly
but you have to prove that a plan is possible. And what I'm saying is that in every time the industrialized world has tried to do that, they fail. Like, look at Germany. They had that huge influx of Turkish immigrants, and what ended up happening was that those immigrants, upon believing themselves in birthright citizenship were A, stuck with no welfare, B, started rioting because they had no social mobility, and the whole place went to hell in a handbasket, and they had to revert back to some form of birthright citizenship.
I mean, to say that this is impossible, if you look at because you're talking about industrialized nations, if we look at the industrialized nations that do this, the only other one who has a jus-soli system is Canada. Every other industrialized nation in the world doesn't follow this system. So how can you say in that context, if you're saying an example every time that it goes, I don't know what verbiage you use there, I don't understand how you can possibly say that every time it must fail.
But I'm going to again say that the United States has just like Germany, where they have that. Let me finish.
But the argument you made before is not this.
I know, but what I'm saying is that we can compare to Germany, we can't compare to Canada, because Canada doesn't have a huge influx of Mexican immigrants coming across the border.
Germany does.
But Germany has a huge influx of Turkish and Pakistani immigrants.
I would say
Canada actually has a lot more immigrants than.
I don't think regardless, it doesn't matter what plan we implement. Other nations around the world have a policy that they're not going to accept our third and fourth generation immigrants, leading them to be citizens.
But that doesn't mean that we can't. I mean, there's nothing that says that just because someone's been there for several generations.
I'm telling you that these people will be citizenshipless. What are you saying?
In a pro world, that doesn't mean that they're inherently not going to be citizens.
Where will they be?
They can be American, because the only thing we're doing by abolishing birthright citizenship is taking away the provision that you automatically gain citizenship by virtue of birth.
Where else would you receive citizenship?
By a period based on how long
you have to prove to us that naturalization process is A, possible, and B, fair. Okay,
it's not naturalization.
You just said they could become U.S. citizens.
Well, no, by birth. If we're looking at second, third, fourth generation, it's not.
There's no grandfather clause where the third and fourth generation immediately becomes citizens.
No, there is based on how long they've been in the country. I mean, those are systems that are being
You're saying we should naturalize everyone, but at the point in which we're saying,
that's not what we're saying.
Alright, so then if you don't naturalize everyone, you're leaving people citizenshipless. Because where else in the world are they going to have citizenship if not for America?
That's simply not true. We're saying that abolition. We're saying they can in the United States. We're saying that abolishing birthright citizenship doesn't have the impact you're talking about. We're saying.
Naturalize it.
How much card time do we need? 16. Okay, is that please?
Yeah, who do you think's winning? I had the animals counts. Districts was the first time I we went 2. That's really bad, actually. Deep is undefeated when he has a beard.
Ultimately, the fundamental issue of this round is whether the government is satisfying its social contract with its citizens by acting in their best interest when deciding a citizenship policy. With that, the affirmative case stands and the negative falls. So our first contention is that birthright citizenship overextends legal residence. Subpoint A, that citizenship is given to individuals with no actual ties to the United States. My opponents have 2 responses. They talk about this idea of, well, they will have ties because they're likely to stay here. And we're saying that that's not something that justifies giving it on birth. And they also say that, well, that exists on a jus sanguinis system also. We're saying, first of all, that's not resolutional because it happens in both pro and con worlds. But then also this fact that it's mainly a convenience tool. We see that we're assuming that children and parents have some sort of implicit obligation. They're allowed to defer on that later, but we're seeing that happen from birth, and it doesn't make sense to do it based on geography. Subpoint B was that it gives incentive for illegal immigration. My opponents say, oh, well, it's economic, it's the primary one. We're saying that we have 2 major reasons. First of all, the idea that people want valuable property for their citizens, and then second, the idea that with this ability to anchor themselves through having children, through birthright citizenship, that plays within the economic mode because it allows them to have more economic opportunities in the United States. Second contention was that it causes economic harm. Subpoint A, that it drains resources. They say that it increases revenue. We mentioned the heritage source, which showed that net that net loss to because of illegal immigrants, and then also this concept of intentionally denying them entry. They shouldn't be allowed based on violating the rule of law. Subpoint B, birthright citizenship causes economic harm to citizens. Well, they say the number of illegal immigrants increases. What we're saying is that that's a change in status of what we actually call them versus them actually coming here. We see the incentive arguments being more important than name arguments. Their first contention was about this being unethical, and we had two major responses to that. First, the idea of what is the moral group. We're saying that the group to which the government has burden is its own citizenry, and therefore the burden is to those current American citizens, and you can't look to the burden to other people, and it doesn't count that way. And then the other idea was that it's this concept of being denied things they deserve versus not giving them what they don't deserve, and they shouldn't deserve this. It's like it's like allowing people to keep money that was stolen. It doesn't make sense. And then their second contention was hostile. I said they had to show preventative care happens. They failed to do so. You have to drop this point. For all these reasons, I urge you to affirm. Thank you.
Before I move down to the main voting issues of today's round, I'd like to make two observations. First, morality should always take precedent over any form of economic impact my opponents give. Two reasons. First of all, remember, morality, unless they can prove that economic impacts are harming the entirety of the nation or harming other forms of morality, let that go. But the second reason why you're just going to not even deal with the economic impacts of today's round is because we have disputing evidence. Okay, at the very most, you as a judge should just see it as a wash and move on. But my second observation is that, yes, my opponents are right. The U.S. government does have an obligation to keep the social contract, but they have to do it in a moral way. For instance, the U.S. government can bomb Mexico and kill everyone, take all the resources, and fulfill the social contract. But it's not necessarily a moral thing to do. It's not something you should vote for. That being said, let's look at the first voting issue today's round, that being morality. Remember, our opponents completely ignore our whole point about the equality principle. You're punishing the child for the father's crime, and that's the biggest impact in today's round. So my opponent was right. We're not seeing more illegal immigrants, but we are seeing a restructuring of what we call these new people. 24 million people in the United States now without social mobility, now without access to any form of welfare, okay? At that point, they're only saying, hey, we can naturalize these people. We can solve through it, naturalization. At that point, we might have already just gone with birthright citizenship. They already would have been citizens in the first place. But at the end of the day, their only offense left is that social ties are not have anything to do with birthright citizenship. But remember, that cuts both ways in a just sanguineous system. You can also have no social ties with the country that you got citizenship from. That being said, look at the second main voting issue, the prevention of social harms. Aside from creating an underclass and basically assigning 24 million people and their next generations to a life of poverty, remember, removing the potential for any form of a hospital crisis. My opponent said, look, you can't prove we're doing preventative care. If you have 24 million more people without any form of welfare, without any form of Medicaid, without any form of preventative care, you are going to see a huge influx in the amount of hospital usage, and that is why illegal immigrants who do not have any access, who do not have children, who have no access to this welfare, use up hospital space twice as much. You're going to see preventable deaths, etc., etc. Therefore, you should vote.